So what is immersive? If I had a nickel for every time someone asked this question, let me tell you, I wouldn't be rich, but I'd have a significant amount of money.
If you're an immersive experience creator like me, you probably have spent hours of your life discussing this topic. And I gotta say, I'm kinda over it. You would think that this question would be simple, but it's actually pretty controversial. Even in the process of writing this episode, I was constantly adding new thoughts and ideas, so I doubt this video will be the end of my discussing this topic, but honestly, I might just go tell people to watch this video the next time I'm asked this question. Is that weird? Look, as a creator in the immersive industry, this question is important, but I personally think that we need to stop discussing what is or is not immersive and start talking about better ways to articulate the kinds of work that we do. Because no matter which way you slice it, the term immersive is covering a lot of different experiences, and we need more specific language to describe what it is we're actually talking about. So in this episode, I'm going to be sharing some of the many ways the word immersive is used, my personal working definition that I like to use, and also, I think most importantly, I want to share a tool that I've started to develop to talk about not just is something immersive or not immersive, this sort of like binary choice, but a way to talk about how immersive something is and in what way. So we can get more specific in what we're talking about and what people should expect from our experiences. For anyone who might be new, I'm Christy Casey, and this is Making Belief, where we're talking about the art and science of immersive experiences. Before I dive into sharing a definition, I want to talk a little bit about why this definition is controversial. And my take might actually be a bit controversial itself. We'll see. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when this happened, but somewhere in the 2000s, mostly UK-based theater companies started using the word immersive to describe their unconventionally staged theater productions. Now, at the time, the term wasn't popular. We had immersive language programs and just, the word existed, but it wasn't being used very actively. Fast forward to, once again, hard to pinpoint, but I'm going to say probably about 2011 when the Sleep No More Gossip Girl episode aired. And this form of theater starts to become trendy and popular. And as that momentum continues, people in the marketing world start picking up on this trend of immersive experiences, and they just start slapping that label on everything. Go ahead and put in the comments what's the most ridiculous thing you've seen the word immersive attached to. I'll go first. Wix websites is very heavily using the term immersive to describe their website builder. I have no idea what definition of immersive they're using, but it doesn't fit into any of the definitions that I personally use or have heard of. Come on, Wix marketing. Really? So naturally, when immersive is being thrown onto any Witch experience, of course the community is annoyed because now this word that came to mean something significant in this world of creators, it doesn't really mean much anymore. It's just sort of cheapened into a marketing buzzword. And now anytime I read something that describes itself as immersive, I think to myself, well, in what way? How are you using that word? And it doesn't really help me know what to expect from that experience. Now, I also feel the frustration of the term immersive having a diluted definition, and it irks me when companies use it in very frivolous ways that don't match any of the definitions I'm about to share. However, I might be about to get controversial here. I think it's important to acknowledge that the immersive theater community co-opted the term themselves. So it is far from unusual for words to have multiple definitions in the dictionary. So it is perfectly acceptable for immersive learning to have a different definition line than immersive theater would. Sometimes the multiple definitions of a word will come from vastly different places and have different etymologies, but for immersive, they all kind of come from the same root word. So the root of the word immersive comes from immergere. I'm pronouncing that like an Italian because in my mind, Italian is the closest to Latin. We're just gonna go with it. It's a dead language, right? Anyway, im just means in, and merge or merge means to plunge. So to plunge in. It's pretty self-explanatory. We use emerge, immerse. You immerse a thing underwater, what have you. So the first recorded use we have of the word immersion was in the 1640s-ish, and it was used to mean absorption in some interest or situation. So a mental absorption. Then in 1965, the Berlitz Language Learning Company trademarked the term for their immersion language programs. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the first use of the word immersive was in 1929, but they didn't say what context it was used in, but I did find that that was also the year of the first flight simulation. So part of me wonders if maybe it was used for that. I don't know. But hey, 1929, that was a long time ago. It's not a new word. Then the word immersive or immersion was used to describe books and video games and TV that sucked you in and fully absorbed your mental attention, kind of similar to that 1640s definition. And now we're back full circle to the early 2000s when the term immersive started being applied to immersive theater experiences. Now, from fellow creators who come from a legacy of that style of immersive experience, generally they like to set the definition around the audience being in the same playing field as the experience. And this definition is very aligned with how No Proscenium frames immersive. Kathryn Yu just recently shared an article about using the term immersive, and she talks a lot about how does the audience relate to the world of the experience. And by her definition, in order for it to be immersive, there should be some meaningful relationship, even if you're just a voyeur or a ghost in the space. There is still some dynamicism and evenness of playing field. I generally like this definition, and it does align with what I expect from a piece that's labeling itself immersive. However, and I think this is where I might get a little controversial, I think that we kind of have to adapt our definition to the publicly accepted usage of the term. And there are a lot of immersive experiences that don't quite fit into that definition, or they feel like they're being stretched into that definition. Namely, things like the Van Gogh experience or immersive art, or the other one is 360 video, which if you see an immersive category at most film festivals, 360 video is included in that. And I personally wouldn't define being a pivot point in a 360 space as being on the same playing field as the action. So if I had to choose one definition for an immersive experience, I would say that it's an experience that happens in 360 degrees around the viewer, and that there's no separation between the art and the person experiencing it. Now, is the glass of a VR headset a separation? Yeah, kind of. So it's tricky. It really, really is tricky. Look, at the end of the day, with all of these definitions, relying on one word to define anything from escape rooms to Sleep No More to Meow Wolf to what we did at the deep dive, it's just too broad. And it's not super useful. Also, life kind of is an immersive experience. And yes, I would roll my eyes at that phrase too, but if you think about it, an experience that happens in 360, an experience that absorbs all of your attention, not every moment in life would fit these definitions, but there are certainly experiences that are not intentionally designed that feel that way. Like when you really click with someone at a party and all of the music and the physical bodies dancing in space all kind of like blur into the background and you are fully absorbed in this moment with another person, that feels just as immersive as many designed immersive experiences that I've had. Why shouldn't that also be called immersive? Sorry if my lighting is like going in and out. The sunshine is moving. Oh, it's a palm tree in front of the sun. Gosh darn it. You're just gonna have to live with it. So instead of looking at immersive as a yes, no, is it or is it not binary, I like to look at immersive as a spectrum. And not just a one-dimensional spectrum of like not immersive to like really, really, really immersive, but a three-dimensional spectrum. I spent so much time, way too much time, trying to like actually turn this into a three-dimensional graph and eventually gave up. So we're gonna do 3 lines instead. Now, this is a working tool. I fully expect it to evolve over time and use. So if you have thoughts on how to make it better, make it more specific, I would love to hear them. If you're like, hey, I think this needs to be a dimension, leave a comment. I want to hear it. I don't know how to graph in 4 dimensions, but I spent way too much time trying to graph this and it didn't work very well. So perhaps the graph is not the most important thing. I do want it to plot on a graph though. I feel like that. It's very satisfying. So the 3 dimensions that I've come up with are the level of engagement, the level of transport, and the level of response. What does that mean? Let's break it down. So level of engagement is most aligned with the like traditional definition of the word immersion, which is absorption into the situation. So how much of my being, brain space, is absorbed into whatever this thing is. So on the engagement spectrum, 0 would be like, I'm really distracted. I'm, noticing the lighting that's flickering and I'm thinking about what I want to eat for lunch. And I'm just, not very focused in my energy. And then on the high end of the spectrum, you have like full absorption to the point where some things that would typically be distracting, you're able to ignore because you're so fully absorbed in the task at hand. Kind of like that experiment where, the psychologist told people to count how many times the basketball was being passed around. And then after the experiment, they were like, did you see the gorilla? And if you were absorbed in the task of watching and counting the basketball passes, you would miss the gorilla. That your attention is on this thing that like something out of the world is not going to break it. That happens in movies all the time too, where like something is a plot hole, but you don't notice it because you're absorbed in the plot and you're invested. Shout out to my episode on the power of expectations where I talk about investment. So if I were going to break this down into like smaller sections, we would have like not capturing your attention, second screen content where your attention is divided. Then we have full attention, but you're like aware that there are other things outside of that space. And then we have like full on absorption, like cult level where you're able to suspend disbelief in things that don't fit the world because you're so engaged with what's in front of you. Next, we have the level of transport. And I think this most aligns with the modern definition of immersive, which tends to revolve around this 360 element, this are you in the same space? How immersive is it on a like physical scale? Is everything in the space part of this other world? And then also, how far from our like real reality is this experience? Is this world? So like Color Factory or Museum of Ice Cream is a very curated space, but you're not being brought into a like fictional world, so to speak. Whereas Meow Wolf is like this whole other world with its own rules and dimensions. So this is all about the physical environment. So if I was going to divide this into subsections, I would say on the low end, you have like chaotic, disjointed, like very undesigned spaces. Then you'll have like design spaces that aren't necessarily designed for a specific experience, but they're like cohesive and they evoke a sense of like either calm or excitement or sultriness or whatever that is. Then you have your hyper real. So it's still like not in a fantasy world, but it's taking reality up a notch. So it's like if you boosted the saturation, that might be your Color Factory, a museum, a themed restaurant, themed bar, something that is elevated, but not necessarily in a fictional world that's fully fleshed out. And then you have what I'm going to call surreal, which doesn't quite feel like the right word, but in this context, I'm going to use it to be that we are now in a new designed reality. So we're no longer in our like quote unquote real everyday world, and we're in the world of this experience. And then you can have like, well, how far is that world from our normal world? Are we in a sci-fi piece? Are we in, pirate times? Are we in some other otherworldly place? And I think how different that is from like an everyday experience is a way to measure how well a piece transports you. So the third scale, in my very biased opinion, is going to be the future definition of immersion. And that is the level of response. So this is how much does the piece talk back to you? How adaptable is the piece to the input of the guest and of the participant? Interaction and like this level of the experience adapting to the guest input is where I think the magic sauce, the key to it feeling more real, comes into play. So if we were going to divide this up into subsections, we have at 0, of course, that it doesn't respond at all. It's a movie. It's a, stage play, which you could argue that a stage play has a little bit of adaptation based on the energy that the audience is giving, but the lines stay the same. And then you have like button or binary choices, as I'm calling them. So like you can flip an on-off switch, or you can choose between two things. And these are sort of like automated reactionary toggles. Things like Bandersnatch, things like escape rooms, where they are responding to an action that the audience takes, but that action outcome is going to be the same no matter who presses that button or like how they press the button. Like there might be a little bit more than just two options, but it's still an automated response with limited outcomes. So each one of these subsections is a spectrum. So, at the higher end of that, you would have maybe things like RPGs where that set of options is extremely complex, and has many different outcomes, but it's still like preset. There's not a human in the loop to like change the dialogue, or eventually an AI in the loop to customize the response that you're getting from that programming. So for responsive, the first half of that spectrum is like automated responsiveness. And then the second half of the spectrum is dynamic responsiveness. So on the like closer to halfway, you'll have light character interactions, where the dialogue will change based on what you say, but probably the outcome of the whole show won't change. And this is where the scale gets tricky, because like, who's to say, is it more immersive if you're in a like video game choice where you can change the ending, or if you're talking to a character and they're speaking directly to you and adapting their dialogue to you, but like ultimately that conversation doesn't really matter in the scheme of the story that's being told. Questionable. But the point of this is that, is the content of the piece dynamically adapting to what the person is bringing it, and to what extent? So on the far end of the spectrum, and apologies for being self-referential, would be a deep dive project. And if you didn't watch my intro video, I was part of this program called the Interactive Deep Dive in Austin, Texas in 2018. And we were creating these highly transportive, participant-driven experiences. The best way that I've found to describe them is to compare them to The Truman Show, if Truman knowingly opted into his fictional reality. So in these experiences, we wrote the story around a participant as the protagonist in the narrative, and all of the actors' roles was to constantly be adapting our script to what this person brought to the table. So our actors, who were trained specifically to do this work, were looking at values and themes that came from conversations with our participant Brian, and then weaving those back into future scenes. And then also like looking at the dynamics between characters of like, oh, he got pushy with Max. Okay, we're gonna like amp up this like rivalry between these two characters because of how our participant responded to that character. And those kinds of like smaller nuanced decisions, because we were live humans in the loop who are also trained to be picking up on these things and incorporating these things, and we had written a script that was revolving around this participant character, and it wasn't, you know, one of our actor characters' stories that he was just peripheral to. There was a high level of responsiveness of that story and that project to the input of the participant. Now, deep dive is obviously the extreme. In the middle of that, I would place experiences like Gatsby. If you're familiar with the UK production of Gatsby, The Willows is also really dynamically engaging. If you want to see more examples, go ahead and head to my next video where I break down a whole list of immersive experiences and go through how they fall on this spectrum as sort of an example of how to use this model. But for our episode on defining immersive, I'm going to wrap it up here. So in conclusion, this episode is about defining immersive. I don't want to stick to just one definition. So in the Christie Casey dictionary, I'm going to give you a couple, or three. The first definition is based off of that 1640 definition. So immersion is the absorption into a situation. Still relevant to immersive experiences today. Total absorption. Definition number 2 is about physical immersion. So the experience happens in 360 degrees and the guest, audience, participant is placed in the middle of the art or action. Definition number 3 is going to be that the audience, participant, guests becomes an active part of the world of the experience. Now, these definitions are, of course, useful for defining what is or is not immersive, So please, for the love of God, if your experience does not fit into one of those 3 definitions, do us a favor, don't use the word immersive. You're setting your audience up for expecting something that they're not going to get. And if you're not sure why that's a problem, go watch my episode on the power of expectations. Now, for those of you whose experiences do fall into those definitions, I really hope that the spectrum of immersion becomes a valuable tool to define not just if an experience is immersive, but how immersive an experience is and in what way. So let me know in the comments below if you find this useful, what you would add or subtract from this model, and just what resonates with you. One of my favorite catchphrases is tools, not rules, which essentially just means that, like, I personally am not interested in like creating the biblical truth of like what is the right way to do these things. I think that models and techniques are tools that are designed to have a certain function. And tools that are designed well can last millennia, like the hammer. But tools can always be redesigned and made to fit different purposes and made to be more efficient. So the tools that I share on this channel are, of course, ever evolving, and I always welcome your feedback and insights on how they can be designed better. So that's it for today's episode. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you get notified every time I post a new video. Those are some free and easy ways for you to help support this channel. It means a lot to me, and it keeps me motivated knowing that people like you are engaged with this work. Also, I have some announcements coming up, including interactive acting training that will be available both virtually and in person in LA. So do go to our website, wearemakingBelieve.com, where you can sign up for a newsletter to be the first to hear those announcements. Link is in the description. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end, and until next time, remember, we are making belief. See ya.